Our story resumes back in Calgary, where the goal is to secure stable employment and find a place to stay. I check into one of the hotels that the oil field companies had been using, and I kind of give them the company's name, and they give me this wicked discount. It works out to maybe about $200 a week. And I start scouring the newspapers for any leads, marketing. I'm kind of focusing on this professional mentality, get a really good job, kind of build on that university education. How hard could it be, right? I found out real quickly university isn't everything it's cut out to be. Chances are you're going to be interviewed by somebody who doesn't really care about a university education, probably been at that company for 5 to 10 years, and just kind of values a certificate or an accreditation society. Accreditation societies are a big thing out here in Alberta. You've got an accreditation society for almost every professional level of job. It's basically a couple courses. You sign up, you pay a membership fee, and they give you this little card that says accredited. And it looks good on a resume. Doesn't really matter if you're good or not at your job, but a lot of companies are looking for this. I sign up for a couple, I go into the orientation, I start doing the coursework, and I realize real quickly, man, this is just like really watered down information. You do like a base ethics course. They ask you what your experience is. You sign up, you sign a membership, and that's it. You're kind of in this accreditation course. You're expected to pay a membership due annually and pay for a couple of courses through their guys, and that's it. Away you go. I didn't really like this idea, so I kind of bailed on it, and I just kind of kept hitting the pavement. I tried a couple employment services agencies, Manpower and Kelly Services, and I learned real quick that some of those folks there are very underqualified to do any sort of placement or even consider themselves an HR professional. I had a couple interviews where somebody would look at my resume and be like, yeah, I just don't like it. It doesn't speak to me. It's got to stand out in the first 2 seconds. Otherwise, we're not going to look at your resume, and that's the real world. I remember recruiting and hiring folks, and I would read that resume beginning to end because I want to see the value that this person brings to the company. But this wasn't happening in Alberta. I found out one of the better ways to actually get out there and get some money was to hit up some construction sites, have my hard hat, my boots, just have myself ready to go, and I'd get some site sweeping jobs. Eventually, I met a couple guys on there who taught me some trades. I learned how to do some demolition, some concrete forming, framing, painting, industrial painting. I kind of made a career out of this for about 3 years. I'd do these jobs on call while trying to infiltrate the film market. Getting into the film industry isn't something they cover in university either. It's one of those lacking areas. I would later go on to write a proposal for the University of New Brunswick where I graduated, trying to implement a course in the real-life struggles of how to actually get into a film union and so forth. Not a lot of this is taught in school. So I found out you got to go to the DGC, the Directors Guild of Canada, and the IATSE union for the trade workers. So I register in there, I get a few gigs back and forth. I juggle it with all the construction gigs and all the painting gigs that I get on the side. And then during the day, I just keep applying for jobs whenever I had breaks or downtime. One of my first big breaks would come from a company in Vancouver called the Media Merchants. They're a projection advertising company. They set up these projectors downtown and they do these massive projections onto building walls and such. And they do really cool promos. Imagine playing video games projected onto like a 100-foot wall, like this giant skyscraper downtown, 30, 40 floors, and we've kind of got the screen set up at the very top, and people around the city can see it. They're like, what's going on down there? That's probably one of the coolest jobs I've worked. You just see a really nice angle of different types of guerrilla marketing. The only downfall was working for this company who started Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, and ended on Sundays. So I'd be working 7 days a week without a break, go back to the regular job and hit up these gigs. But from time to time, we'd have some downtime, and I'd kind of get my weekends back. I also started volunteering at an organization called the Calgary Urban Project Society. They kind of deal with homeless stuff and low-income folks, programs, education, healthcare. I got a volunteer gig proofreading some proposals for grants, and then I ended up starting doing my own proposal on grants for education programs within this organization. That kind of got me noticed. I got invited to some meetings. Even as a volunteer, I would ask the hard questions at these meetings. People would be like, who is this guy? Why is he asking these hard questions? They treated me pretty well. My buddy was the volunteer coordinator and proposal guy, so he would usually take me out for beers at the end of the week, and that was how I was paid. One day I'm at the mall, and their executive director starts yelling at me because she thinks I ditched work, and I'm just kind of out there doing absolutely nothing. And I had to explain to her that I'm actually a volunteer, and I'm not even an official volunteer. I'm just kind of doing it on my own personal time just to help them get money. And she's kind of taken back by it. She didn't realize that I'd put that much effort as just a volunteer. She kind of speaks to one of the operations guys, and I get a job helping the social workers place people into housing. But I quickly learned that this isn't really my cup of tea. These housing first programs, you kind of got to sell folks that don't have houses, but they also come with addictions and mental health and stuff. So you kind of want to make sure that your landlord isn't going to get somebody who's going to trash their place. The other thing with housing first is they kind of expect you to get somebody into housing before they deal with the issues. So you might have a guy who just assaulted a landlord or is on the Canada's equivalent to Megan's List. So you don't really want to put those guys in housing with kids. But I got a speaking to because I'm not allowed to pick and choose. That kind of really upsets me and sours me in the housing field and the social work field. So I'm kind of trying to get out of there now. With some luck, I get a Calgary equivalent in Calgary housing. So I'm kind of managing the intake into the properties so I can technically pick and choose. I'm still not supposed to. But you really kind of want to give a chance to good folks and folks with a story and motivated to change their lives. So I take that approach. I run a few unique programs for kids who are going to school full time and working and don't qualify for all those low income grants. I run a few other family based programs. And I'm in there just kind of trying to motivate people with my own life story, kind of get them, hyped up and ready to change their lives. But I quickly realized not everybody's motivated to change their lives. I get in trouble with the mayor's office a lot because I kind of tell people, hey man, you got to pay your rent. Apparently that's not allowed. I call people out for fraud. That's not allowed. I get complaints from the mayor's office. I think I was getting about 3 or 4 complaints escalated to the mayor's office every once in a while. But it's pretty consistent work, so I try my best to stick with it. Benefits are great. Vacation time is great. I didn't even know what vacation was in the previous 10, 15 years just because downtime was kind of like vacation time. But downtime is when you're looking for work. You're not getting paid to take time off. So to actually get a steady paycheck where I'm allowed to take a couple weeks off and do stuff and still get compensated, that was just one of the coolest things ever. City workers complain a lot. Every city worker thinks they're worth like 10 times more than they're making. And here I am, a guy who's like struggled through life and I'm just like enjoying all the benefits. We're on this schedule where we get every other Mondays off. That in itself is like a vacation. I don't even know what to do on my days off, so I pick up a second job to pay my car off early and start saving to get a condo. The city job and the professional life really is paying off. I start saving, I get a condo, I pay my car off, I start visiting my family more often. It's a really good balance. However, one thing you learn about city jobs is the bureaucracy. The folks managing the frontline staff aren't always the most competent or qualified. A lot of these guys probably should be straight out fired. Just really irresponsibly running programs, losing money. During COVID, it was kind of my wake-up call that I really didn't want to work for this organization anymore. I was seeing tens of millions of dollars in fraud. The city had put a moratorium up on rent increases, so even though folks were fraudulently claiming benefits, the rents weren't going up, but the complaints were. I tried to create an internal committee to kind of reevaluate the stance on fraudulent activity. Really, if you're in social housing, you've got a pact with the government that you're going to be honest and report all your income. You've got folks receiving, $5,000 to $10,000 in benefits. Everybody in this family now suddenly works or was displaced by work, and even these kids, 2-year-old babies, are getting income checks. But nobody in the city wanted to do anything about it. They were all afraid of how it would look like in the news that if you reported somebody for stealing government money. It's just one of those baffling things. During COVID, I contemplated moving back to the East Coast. They were doing a reorg, and my job was up on the chopping block. But prices on the East Coast had started rising. Stuff that you could get for affordable living in some small towns were now just a little bit ridiculous. People in Ontario who'd committed all the income fraud were now just buying up tons of property. Should I stick it out in the city for another 5 years, hit that 20-year mark, and then try to move back? What if all the houses were just like ridiculously priced? Halifax was kind of always one of the places I set my eyes on, but looking at Halifax with its lower average income versus Calgary and the fact that the houses were now double the price of Calgary, I decided to stick around with Calgary and keep the city job going, get the benefits and get the pension plan built up a little bit more. This layoff concept was a blessing in disguise because it kind of motivated me to just keep applying for absolutely every job that came up in the city. I tailored my resume to like almost any sort of combination I could. Some would say failed to graduate high school, some would say that I had my full education complement, but I wasn't really getting the interviews. I was like, how come I'm so qualified for a lot of these jobs? Turns out there's this redeployment program that kind of has to put everybody as a priority if they're really crappy at one job. And they kind of take all the good jobs that competent people really should be getting. And that one sours me a bit too. By now, I'm really getting that soured Calgary mentality going on. I've been here for 15 years and I'm just one sour, bitter city fella. But I luck out, I get this interview with the Calgary police to do this media disclosure gig. It's kind of like a little bit of tech work and watching YouTube videos, really. I think in layman terms, that's basically what it is. I mean, the personalities in there are pretty dry. They still think they should be making like 200 grand a year. A lot of really bitter people. But I stick to it. I learned the entire job in like shorter time than anybody's been there. I worked myself up to a lead and a trainer. And you know what? Life's pretty good now. I've got some savings. I can start thinking about returning back to the East Coast. But it's kind of now a seesaw. Do I stick around here where I've got the career? I mean, I've been trying for about 20 years to get a job in the East Coast. I'm hearing about the job market in the East Coast that really wants its guys to come back. I remember some time back ago, the University of New Brunswick and the Irving family had come to Calgary to kind of lure people back to that elusive East Coast lifestyle. All the homesick folks gathered up in this room. We listened to this motivating speech by one of the Irvings. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to go. So I'm chit-chatting with this guy and I say, hey man, I'm ready to go. He's like, what? I said, I'm ready to go. I listened to your speech. You're ready to haul us all back there. And you know what, man, for minimum wage and steady employment, it's a lot better than I had going. I mean, this was about the 2010 or 2011, so I hadn't really got with the city yet. But this guy's trying to figure out my angle, and I'm saying, like, listen, I'll even do janitorial. Like, you get me that steady paycheck, because that's the biggest issue out east is you can't really get a steady paycheck. And he looks at me as if I'm, like a full-blown retard, and he says, no, man, do you have like an engineering degree or like a master's or a PhD? And I said, I'll get it. I'll get whatever you need me to get. Just line me up with a job. I don't think he'd ever actually expected somebody to say that they were ready for a job. That's just one of those weird things, those weird awkward moments. You're here to recruit and here you've got somebody willing to work. It's a strange thing to listen to employers on the East Coast complain about how they can't get suitable candidates and good candidates to take over jobs, and job markets are dying because of it. But if you consider it, they're not really willing to help anybody out. It's kind of that boomer mentality. You've got to magically fit into there somehow. I don't really know how they expect it to work. They're not interviewing folks. They're not creating new jobs. They're not creating more jobs. The population is growing. The economy should be booming. But instead, it's just kind of crumbling. It's now kind of one of the most dependent provinces out there in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI. What's going on? I also look at the education system, University of New Brunswick. I had a wonderful experience. The social aspects, the people I met, my boss who mentored me in some of the best lessons in life I ever had. But after graduating, I must have applied for over 100 jobs, admin jobs, assistant jobs, teaching jobs. I could not even get one single interview. Imagine applying to a company that you've just gone through 5 years of life with. You've got the experience, you give them your resume, and they don't even value their own education to give you an interview. That is baffling. Yet, like clockwork, every year around springtime, I get the telemarketers calling, asking if I would like to donate, 100, 200, maybe even $1,000 to their programs. And I usually give them my life story. I give them my life story of how great university education I thought I got and all my work experience and social life skills that I developed through time. And I give them the stance. I said, I moved out here because I couldn't get a job. And 20 years later, I can't get a job in New Brunswick. And I asked them, I say, hey, I would gladly donate to your university if you could hook me up with a job on campus. And the phone usually goes very silent for a little bit of time. You could tell somebody on that other end is probably a University of New Brunswick student volunteering to raise funds for the University of New Brunswick. And they're really contemplating life now because they've just heard the story of a recent graduate. And that in itself is the great paradox of a university education. As I sit here planning my next few years and my desire to always retire before I was 40, now I'm in my mid 40s. My desire is to retire before I'm 50. I think it's pretty doable at this point, but I kind of really want to see the economy out east, suffer anymore. I don't really want to see the housing market start crumbling again, where you're paying ridiculous prices for falling over houses. Even if you go to realtor.ca and you look at some of the houses out there for 100 grand, it's really just a small lot with a dilapidated house that's about to fall over at any minute. And you can look anywhere else across Canada and you might find $100,000 and you might be able to get a condo even just outside a major city. That'll be the great debate within myself, my inner dialogue for the next 2 to 3 years, and the next step in my plan to finally return home someday.